In this video, we're going to continue with integer inputs examples, and notice how currently the assertion error that we get at the end of our test driver program says that it's trying to use getInt for range with the range 9 to 1, which is invalid range, and the function or the main driver program was expecting runtime error exception to be thrown, and it of course wasn't thrown because our implementation of getInt for range is unimplemented. So we can try to fix this and basically check the specification for this function. GetInt for range, it says here that basically the function is going to require that the minimum is less than or equals maximum, and if they're out of order, we need to report it accordingly. So this can be very easily fixed with just it's this getInt for range that we're talking about. So in here, I'm going to leave it unimplemented, except that I'm going to show you how, obviously, I think this would be the first check that this function needs, is to check the range and accordingly raise an exception that you have provided a bad range. Okay, so if we save this and rerun this test again, so okay, we can provide some values here just for testing. Okay, and so we make some progress here, and the same assertion is for getFloat for range. Again, the floating point number is the fraction here also would not be able to satisfy this invalid range 9 to 1. So basically, we just need the same exact test for the range. Over here is that if we get this float for range with improper specified range, this would be the first thing to do. Just like I told you, the integer inputs logic are similar to floating point number inputs logic, so you just basically duplicate it between these two sets of functions. Okay, so one more thing that I would like to try to implement in this series of demonstration is perhaps this getInteger for a range with default. So the series of function parameters is the prompt to display the minimum and the maximum and the default value. And again, let's check with documentation, getInt range with default. The documentation here says that, or the spec says here is that, of course, we need to make sure that the minimum, the result is within this range. However, it says that if the user accepts a default value, which is which can be passed to this function, and then the user enters the empty string to accept the default, then the minimum and maximum range is never checked. So the default value can actually be outside of the specified range, and the range is never checked. Okay, and so then the default value will be unconditionally returned no matter what, if the user enters an empty string. So in such case, let's just do a demonstration of this implementation, getInteger for range with default. So step number one, I would like to be able to utilize this getString with default, because it's already handling default quite nicely. So let's just hope that this works and we can try something like this. So this is our getInt range with default, and we can just say a result equals get string with default, and instantly display pass the prompt there, and get display the default value. Okay, so then if the result is the default value, so that basically the get string with default, we can just accept that immediately, and we can say that in such case, if result is the same as default value, just return the result. We're not going to even check the range. And this time, if that was not the case, then the first order of business is to check the range. And then we're going to, just like in prior example, we're just going to say raise the runtime error. Okay, and specify that the idea behind this error is that it's the bad range that was provided. Okay, and then we're going to just do the standard checks for, like, we can now start doing the checks for the range. Okay, so for instance, if we're I'm trying to fix my indentation here, we can say if the result is less than a minimum, and then, of course, we're going to say that the value is not in range and should be in this range. Otherwise, if the maximum is less than the result, it's also happens to be outside of range. And so otherwise, I suppose that if these two checks for the range pass, then we are ready to return this result. Right? However, because we're still doing this conversion, right? We're using the get string with default, and we're using an integer conversion here. Perhaps you know, we should not allow user to enter non-integer inputs. So the idea is that we can use the try block right here. All right, and of course this becomes what we are trying, and if this if this ends up being with with this exception, and I think exception needs to be at this level of indentation, right? Try and except. So we get this value error, which is the result of this attempt to convert to integer. Then we're going to say invalid integer value. And in all cases, when we display these errors, right, as a result of the range check or the result of the unsuccessful conversion to the integer, we say try again, which means, I think, what we need to do is that we need to do it just like we did with get int. We just need to do this in the endless loop. So we're just going to increase the indentation, and this is the place. Like, we have two options for the user to return from here. The first option is to return the result because it was a default value. It's exactly the same as the default value. And the second possibility is that the value is in range and we just return what they just entered. Okay, so these are our demonstrations. So I think that the rest of the code, which is left unimplemented, right? So in every place where it says unimplemented, it means that the function is unfinished and you need to write code. So all of this is like, you know, pretended this wasn't here and you need to fix it. Okay, and so even though I provided the first line of implementation over here and in get float for range over here, I just provided these first lines of code. You have to write the code to provide the rest of this function. But with the number of examples that I already finished here, like for example, this this, I think this is just something that needs to go away, right? We need to remove it. So now it looks good. So with the with this set of complete examples and still unfinished examples, you can get started with this version of this library of variety of keyboard input functions to be used in many different places, where you can just basically pick the one that fits best your condition, and you can reuse these functions, this entire module, in other projects. All right, so this is our challenge. You just need to complete this, and when you run it, so let's run this again. When you run it, you can just basically you can test it with variety of inputs. Just try whatever works, as we discussed earlier, right? So try different inputs and make sure that everything is working correctly after you finish implementation of all of the functions. So this is our challenge for this week. If you have any questions, please post them on the discussion board for the course.